My parents canceled my birthday because my sister felt invisible. That night, I left with $600 and never looked back until they begged me for help. I'm walking through the main door after a 9-hour shift at the hardware shop, holding a chocolate cake I purchased from the grocery store bakery. It cost me $7. Happy birthday was written in blue icing, which was already smeared from the heat. It wasn't a lot, but it was mine. My parents, Margaret and Robert, were seated in the living room with my sister Madison, as if they were staging an intervention. My mother conveyed the news as soon as I stepped in, with an attitude of practiced disappointment rather than pity. Ryan, we've decided there will be no birthday celebrations this year. Madison has been feeling overshadowed lately and requires the family's complete attention right now. Do you understand? This is not a question, but a statement. As if my sentiments about the situation were just background noise. Madison sat on the aged leather couch, appearing appropriately upset, with artificial tears gathering in her eyes. That's when something clicked in my mind. This wasn't just another case of me becoming invisible in my own family. This was the last straw in a lifetime of erasure. I set the cake on the coffee table without saying anything, headed straight to my room, and began packing everything I owned. The oppressive weight of that moment made perfect sense when I considered the prior 21 years of my life. Let me back up and explain the family dynamics that led to this calamity. Madison is 3 years younger than me. When she was 9, she won a junior beauty pageant. One of those little regional competitions that desperate parents convinced themselves were important. I recall that day vividly because that was the last time my parents looked at me with genuine pride. Everything changed just before they awarded Madison the cheap plastic trophy. From that point forward, every family event, every saved dollar, and every ounce of parental attention was put into Madison's unending pageants, dance classes, voice lessons, and acting coaches. The mansion became a temple to her subpar talents. My straight-A report cards received fleeting nods, whereas Madison's participation ribbons were framed and hung on every possible wall. When I was admitted to the state science fair with a project I had spent months constructing, my accomplishment was overshadowed by the excitement of Madison's next competition. I learned to celebrate my successes alone in my room, while Madison used the living room as her own platform. Dad began working overtime at the factory to cover Madison's costly competition costumes and travel expenses. He'd come home looking devastated, eat his supper in silence, and then sit through hours of Madison practicing her routines. I watched him age for a decade and 4 years. His shoulders were permanently sunk under the weight of financial stress and mental strain. The only person who could see through this crazy was my grandfather, George, Dad's arranged father, who lived across town. The family rarely discussed George because he and his mother had an old conflict over not financially supporting Madison's pageant goals. You're a smart dude. But George would surreptitiously meet me at the library or park, bring sandwiches, and listen to me talk about school, my part-time work at the hardware store, and my college ambitions. He was the one who rejoiced when I was accepted to state college on a half scholarship. He also set up a tiny education fund for me without informing anyone, making deposits whenever he could. What I overheard 4 hours before made that birthday night much terrible. I had arrived home early from my shift and heard Madison on the phone in her room. Her door was open, and her voice had that artificial sweetness she employed when telling lies to her pals. "Yeah, I already told Mom that I need extra attention right now," Madison remarked, laughing. "Ryan's birthday is tomorrow, so who cares?" I told them I'd been feeling really melancholy and overlooked. Mom purchased it totally. "She'll tell him tonight that we won't be celebrating because I need family support." I stood motionless in the corridor as she continued. "The best part is that nobody knows. I dropped out of college 4 weeks ago. That dismissal letter from the registrar is going to arrive any day now, but by then, I'll have convinced them that I dropped out because I was too stressed out by the family focusing on Ryan instead of me. Can you believe he still lives here at 24? What a loser." She laughed, that cruel little sound I'd heard 1,000 times before. "I've already convinced my mother that we should spend Ryan's birthday discussing my feelings and my future. By the time the letter arrives, they'll be so concerned about my mental health that they won't care about the $45,000 they spent on my education. $45,000. They said they couldn't help with my education expenditures because money was limited, but they had invested $45,000 on Madison's education, which she had just thrown away. In that moment, I felt something snap inside me. Something that had been cracking for years had finally cracked. So, when I strolled in 4 hours later with that awful store-bought cake and found them all sitting there, ready to cancel my birthday due to Madison's created problem, I realized what was going on. Madison had engineered the entire incident to distract from her academic failure. She was using my birthday as a distraction, making herself the victim before the truth could be revealed. Mom sat forward on the couch, hands folded in that practiced manner she used when imparting what she thought was motherly wisdom. "Ryan, you must understand that Madison is going through a terrible period right now. She has been feeling unappreciated by her family, and we need to show her that she is our top concern. Your birthday comes every year, but Madison's emotional state is delicate. We need to come together as a family to support her." This means no celebration, no cake, and no presents. We'll spend the evening discussing Madison's sentiments and how we may better support her dreams. I looked at Dad, expecting for some opposition, some indication that this was wrong. But Robert only stared at his hands, defeated as usual. He'd stopped fighting years ago, preferring survival over confrontation. Madison eventually spoke, her voice shaking with artificial emotion. "I apologize, Ryan. I understand how difficult this is for you, but I sometimes feel invisible, as if no one notices how much I am fighting. I need to know that this family cares about me and that I am not forgotten." Forgotten. She actually used that word. The girl whose face adorned every wall, whose awards filled every shelf, and whose requirements dictated every family decision. She felt forgotten. Meanwhile, I'd been sleeping in the same tiny bedroom since I was 5 years old because Madison required more space for her pageant outfits. I'd been wearing the same 4 pairs of pants for 3 years because Madison needed new outfits for Instagram shots. I'd been so completely forgotten that most extended family members couldn't even recall what I was studying in college. That's when I made a decision. No declaration, no dramatic encounter, no pleading for acknowledgement. I simply placed the sad little cake on the coffee table, glanced at each of them one final time, and went to my room. They presumably expected me to pout, as I had done in the past. They had no notion I was about to disappear from their lives entirely. I strolled through my room with the ease of someone who had been planning this escape subconsciously for years. Every drawer was emptied. All important documents have been obtained. Every piece of clothing I cared about fit into 3 large duffel bags in my backpack. The room appeared weird as I packed, as if it was suddenly exposing what it had always been, a temporary stop rather than a home. My entire existence fit in 4 bags. That's what 24 years in this house came to. 4 luggage and a college admission letter. I heard footsteps in the hall around midnight. Dad gently knocked on my door. "Ryan, can I come in?" I opened the door. He stood there appearing older than his 50 years, with slumped shoulders and sad eyes. For a brief moment, I wondered whether he'd come to his senses. Maybe he would finally stand up for me. Instead, he took out his wallet and gave me 6 crumpled $100. "This is all I have for now," he explained quietly. "I realize things aren't fair. I know we failed you, but I don't know how to make it right. Madison, your mother, I simply do not have any more fight in me." I accepted the money, not because I felt it would make things better, but because I knew I would need it. $600 was the most he had ever given me for anything. The fact that it came with an apology for my entire childhood only made matters worse. "Thanks," I replied bluntly. "Where will you go?" "Does it matter?" He looked as if I had smacked him, but he did not dispute, only nodded and walked away. Shoulders appeared more drooping than before. I left at 3 a.m. While everyone was sleeping, I threw my luggage into my beat-up Honda Civic, which had 192,000 miles on it, and headed to the one place I knew I'd be welcomed. Grandpa George's modest home across town. George opened the door in his bathrobe, took one glance at my bags, and just stepped aside to let me in without hesitation. That's the issue about George. He didn't require explanations. He understood immediately. He responded dryly, "My birthday went well, so I take it," before proceeding to the kitchen to make hot chocolate. I told him everything. I overheard the talk. The celebration was canceled, and Dad gave me $600. George listened without interrupting, his worn hands curled over his mug, his jaw twitching as if he were physically preventing himself from voicing what he truly believed. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You can stay here as long as you need," he murmured at last. "The spare room is yours. There is no rent, no requirements. Just promise me that you will complete college and create something of yourself. The best retribution is to live a good life," I promised. That spare room became my launch pad. I worked full-time at a hardware store, attended classes, and spent every free moment learning about real estate investing. George, it found out, had dabbled in property renovation decades before. He taught me everything he knew about discovering undervalued houses, doing budget modifications, and increasing rental income. The college fund he'd been surreptitiously putting up for me turned out to be $9,500, enough to finance a year's tuition provided I stayed local and continued working. I completed my degree in 4 years instead of 4 by attending summer classes and maximizing my credit hours each semester. Meanwhile, my family fell apart without me as the scapegoat. Madison's college sent me a discharge letter 3 weeks after I departed. Mom called me 19 times that day. I didn't respond. She left voicemails that ranged from angry to frantic to guilt-tripping. "Ryan, your sister needs you right now. This is a family crisis. How can you leave us like this? We need to portray a united front. Please call me back immediately." I deleted all of the messages without properly listening. I found out what was going on from George, who had little communication with Dad. The $45,000 tuition bill was due. Madison's mental health crisis defense fell flat when the registrar indicated that she had failed every single class due to a lack of attendance. Mom was infuriated. Dad had resigned. Madison was playing the victim more than ever, making her academic failure about the family not meeting her emotional needs enough without me there as the buffer, the responsible one who made everyone else's dysfunction look less horrible in comparison. They needed to truly look at each other. Apparently, they didn't like what they saw. I graduated from college at the age of 25 with a business administration degree with exactly 0 family members in attendance. George arrived with a tiny cake and a card with a $1,200 check. He dubbed it investment capital. Go make your first deal. That summer, I discovered a foreclosed property via a bank auction listing. 3-bedroom house in a respectable area that had been vacant for 9 months. The grass was waist high. The paint was peeling. The interior appeared to have been abandoned mid-renovation by someone who had ran out of money and hope. Perfect. The bank listed it at $57,000, but I could tell they were desperate. Most buyers who desired move-in ready homes avoided properties in this condition. I spent a week gathering comparable sales data, calculating repair costs, and creating a precise remodeling budget. I offered $51,000, expecting them to counter. They accepted the $49,000 within 36 hours. George's $1,200 investment, plus every dime I'd earned from 4 years of working at the hardware shop, served as a down payment. I got a modest business loan for the rest, using the property as collateral. When I stepped in with my restoration plans and budget spreadsheets, the bank officer appeared suspicious, but the figures were solid. He approved it. The following 7 months were tough. I'd work at my regular job during the day, then go to the property and work until midnight or later. I ripped off the nasty carpet. Beautiful oak hardwood underneath, just needed to be refinished. All surfaces were patched and painted. I replaced obsolete light fixtures with new alternatives from the hardware store, where I received an employee discount. I landscaped the yard myself. We spent weekends pulling weeds and planting shrubs. I learned plumbing by viewing YouTube videos and calling on contractors I met at the hardware store. I figured out basic electrical work in the same way. Made a lot of mistakes, but learned from each one. The first faucet I installed leaked for 4 days before I realized I'd overlooked a washer. The first light switch I wired was backwards, but by the end, I was able to tackle most basic home repairs with confidence. I also learned about permit inspections and the million minor nuances that distinguish amateur landlords from professional property managers. We discovered that the city required particular permissions for certain electrical work. We discovered that rental houses need specific safety features, such as hardwired smoke alarms. Every regulation felt like a roadblock intended to keep individuals like me from succeeding. But I took each one as a lesson in how to do things correctly. When I finished, the place looked drastically different. Fresh paint, updated fixtures, refinished floors, landscaped yard. It was properly appraised and valued at $96,000. Through 7 months of effort and approximately $17,000 in materials and licenses, I had effectively built $47,000 in equity. I listed it for rent at $1,350 per month. We received 16 applications in the first week, selected a young couple, both teachers, with a stable salary, outstanding references, and no red flags. The rent covered my mortgage payment, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance fund, leaving me with roughly $250 per month. That surplus was put straight into savings for the next house. But, more crucially, I had demonstrated my ability to do this. That first property was about more than just money. It was about demonstrating that I could transform something broken into something valuable, that I could create something tangible with my own hands and intelligence. The second property arrived 9 months later, another foreclosure. This is a duplex. The process remains the same. Research, compute, remodel, and rent. This time, the task moved faster since I understood what I was doing. By the end of the remodeling, I could tile a bathroom, install a toilet wire, a ceiling fan, and patch drywall better than half of the contractors I'd seen. The third property was a little single-family home that required significant remodeling. The previous owner had begun gutting the kitchen and then seemingly gave up. I spent 4 months finishing up what they had started, while also learning cabinet installation and countertop work. Every property taught me something new. Each refurbishment increased my competence. Each successful rental demonstrated that I could do this professionally. By the age of 27, I had owned 3 rental homes. By 29, I had 7. By the age of 31, I was running a small real estate investment company with 17 properties that generated a constant monthly income. I'd created something substantial from nothing, with the same determination that my family despised about me. During those years, my family made occasional attempts to reach me. Mom would call on holidays, leaving notes about healing family wounds and letting go of old hurts. Madison found me on social media and messaged me about how much she had grown and how sorry she was. I ignored it all. Not out of spite, but because I really had nothing to say to them. They belonged to a life that I had left behind. I'd moved so far beyond that version of myself that conversing with them felt like trying to talk to strangers about someone else's issues. Then George got ill. When they discovered the cancer, it was at stage 3. He was 74 and stubborn as hell. insisting on minimum treatment so that he could die on his own terms, rather than wasting away in a hospital. I moved back into his home to care for him during his final months. That is when my family made their move. Mom arrived at George's place one afternoon while I was at work. She'd learned from a distant cousin that George was dying. She probably saw this as an opportunity to reconnect while I was vulnerable. George, bless him, intercepted her at the entrance and refused to allow her enter. "Margaret," he replied bitterly, "you must be nervous to show up here after what you did to that boy." "I'm his mother," she said, attempting to seem hurt. "I have the right to visit my son. You forfeited that privilege when you choose your daughter's fantasy above your son's reality. Ryan does not want to see you. Now leave my property before I call the police." She departed, but not before leaving a letter. George handed it to me that evening. I almost threw it away unopened, but something compelled me to open it. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation. 3 pages describing how she had always loved her children equally, how she had done her best under challenging circumstances. Madison had definitely transformed and was now working hard to achieve independence. There is no true apology, only explanations and justifications clothed in victim rhetoric. The final paragraph was the real kicker. "We're experiencing financial issues right now. Your father's overtime was reduced, and Madison has been trying to find steady job. We could really need your help. I understand you've been doing well in real estate. Perhaps you could offer us some advice or assistance with a loan. Family helps family. Ryan, that is what we do." There it was. The true cause for the recent interest in reconciliation. They needed money. I showed the letter to George. He read it and then returned it with a contemptuous shake of his head. "They have not altered at all," he stated. "Still relying on people. Still reluctant to accept responsibility. They still expect you to solve their problems. I understand. What are you planning to do?" "Nothing." I said nothing. George smiled. "That's my boy." 4 weeks later, he died quietly in his sleep. He left me everything. The home, his savings, and his old truck. The will contained a note. "Ryan, you were the grandchild I was proud to have and the son my boy never learned to be. Use this foundation to create something amazing. Don't let them drag you back down." The funeral was small. Me and a handful of George's old acquaintances. Dad, Mom, and Madison did not arrive. They were not invited. Dad looked dreadful, older than ever, hollow-eyed. He approached me following the service. "I apologize." He stated everything. "About being too weak to confront your mother, about allowing Madison to manipulate all of us, and about not being the father you needed. I studied him for a long time. I didn't experience the wrath I expected. Just a feeling of distant sadness for this man who has squandered years of his life fostering disorder. You can't fix the past," I told Robert. "However, you can avoid repeating it in the future." "I'm getting divorced," he announced abruptly. "I filed papers last week. I should have done it years ago, but I kept believing things will improve. They never did." "Good," I replied. "Maybe now you can figure out who you truly are rather than who Margaret wanted you to be." We did not hug or have a tearful reconciliation. Instead, we nodded at each other like business colleagues and parted ways. But something had shifted. Dad was finally making a decision, rather than simply accepting whatever happened to him. Inheriting George's house provided me with the funds I needed to expand the business. I sold the property for $195,000 and used the proceeds to purchase a small apartment complex with 8 units that required extensive work but had solid bones. We spent 18 months renovating the properties before renting them out to quality tenants at market rates. The business grew. By the age of 33, I was managing 46 properties spread across 3 counties. By the age of 36, I'd invested in commercial real estate, small office buildings, retail strip malls, and even a small warehouse complex. Each acquisition was thoroughly researched, prudently financed, and managed with the same attention to detail that I had learned from the first foreclosure. The key was treating tenants as individuals rather than revenue sources. I responded to maintenance requests within 36 hours, maintaining properties in excellent condition. Instead of trying to squeeze every last dollar, we charged fair market rates. Built a reputation as a landlord that people wanted to rent from. Word spread. My vacancy rates were consistently less than 6%, while the market average was 13 to 16%. I also began mentoring other young investors, many of whom reminded me of myself at 25, hungry, determined, but lacking the necessary knowledge and connections to get started. I'd meet with them for coffee, discuss their business plans, and occasionally partner with them on their first deals. Watching someone succeed by applying the principles George taught me felt like the most meaningful way to honor his legacy. In addition to rental income, the investment company became profitable. I'd find distressed properties, renovate them efficiently, and then either keep them for rental income or sell them to other investors at market prices. The company earned a reputation for taking on difficult projects that others avoided: weird layouts, code violations, and difficult locations. I realized that problems that others saw as deal breakers could be turned into opportunities if you knew how to solve them systematically. When I was 34, my annual revenue reached multiple 6-figure levels. Not bad for a 4-year-old who left home with $600 in a duffel bag. Somewhere along the way, I had become legitimately wealthy. Not wealthy enough to own a private jet, but comfortable in a way that my parents were never, despite their constant desire to appear successful. The difference was that I had built something real, whereas they had been making appearances on credit cards and overtime. I also met Claire. She was a real estate attorney in charge of the closing on one of my commercial properties, a small office building that I was converting into mixed-use retail space. The previous owner had gotten caught up in code violations and was selling at a loss to avoid the hassle. I saw potential where others saw problems. Claire walked into our first meeting dressed sharply and carrying a briefcase that appeared to weigh more than she did. She was direct and efficient, with absolutely no patience for nonsense. Within 6 minutes, she had identified 4 potential issues with the title that the previous attorney had overlooked. Within 12 minutes, she had proposed solutions for all 4. I'm impressed that you read the entire contract. Most attorneys simply skimmed the standard material. That is literally my job, she replied, not looking up from her notes. You'd be surprised at how many people pay me to do things they could do themselves by simply reading the documents. We ended up getting coffee after the closing. She suggested it, saying she preferred working with investors who understood what they were purchasing rather than just chasing money. We spoke for 3 hours about real estate market trends and property law. She grew up in a trailer park, attended law school while working 4 jobs, and had no patience for people who made excuses rather than making progress. My mother always told me to find a nice, stable man to take care of me. Claire mentioned this on one of our early dates. She intended it as advice. I interpreted it as a warning about what not to do. We immediately clicked. 2 people who had started from scratch and understood that success was not about impressing others. It was about creating something tangible that could not be taken away. She also understood family dysfunction in ways that most people don't. Her father was an addict who drained the family's savings several times before disappearing when she was 13. Her mother had spent years justifying his loyalty to a destructive man over the safety of her children. Claire, like me, had learned early on that the people who are supposed to love you can also be the ones holding you back. Do you know what I enjoy about real estate? She said this one evening as we were reviewing contracts at my kitchen table. Buildings do not lie. They do not manipulate. They do not make excuses. Either the foundation is solid or it isn't. Either the structure is stable or it is not. Everything is measurable, fixable, improvable. I wish people worked the same way. We dated for 18 months before I proposed. Nothing fancy. Just the 2 of us at the first property I'd ever renovated, standing in the living room where I'd spent 7 months learning how to build something from broken pieces. I told her that was exactly what she'd helped me do with my life. Take someone broken and help them become whole without trying to change who they fundamentally were. She said yes before I finished the question. We got married 3 years later at a small venue that held exactly 60 people. Small ceremony, close friends, only no family drama, no performance, no pretense, just 2 people who understood each other committing to building something together. Dad came, which surprised me. He'd fully divorced Margaret by then and was dating someone named Diane, who actually treated him like an equal. He looked healthier than I'd seen him in years, like decades of weight had been lifted off his shoulders. I'm proud of you, he told me at the reception. George would be too. Thanks. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he continued. But I want you to know I'm trying to be better to do better. I can see that, I said, and I meant it. Around this time, I got an unexpected message on social media from Madison. Unlike the previous attempts at contact, this one was different. No excuses, no manipulation, just a straightforward message. Ryan, I know I don't deserve a response, but I wanted you to know I've been working on myself. Got a job at a restaurant, been there 3 years now, started as a hostess, worked up to shift manager. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and I'm proud of it. I'm sorry for everything. You don't have to forgive me or even respond. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what you've known all along. That real worth comes from what you build, not what you're given. I didn't respond immediately, showed it to Claire, who read it carefully. What do you think? She asked. I think people can change, I said, but I also think time will tell if it's real or just another performance. Fair. 8 months later, Madison messaged again, this time with photos of her working at the restaurant. A simple apartment she'd rented on her own. A small savings account she'd built up. No requests, no manipulation, just evidence of a life she was building without anyone's help. I responded with a single line. Proud of you for doing the work. Her reply came hours later. Thank you. That means more than you know. We didn't become close, didn't have tearful reunions or pretend the past didn't matter, but we established a distant respect. 2 people who shared DNA and trauma, acknowledging each other's existence without demanding anything. As for Mom, I heard through the family grapevine that she was living in a small apartment after the divorce, working as a receptionist, still telling anyone who'd listened about her ungrateful children who'd abandoned her. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that she'd ended up doing the same type of work Madison had started with, except Madison had used it as a foundation to grow, while Margaret used it as proof of victimhood. Last year, I decided to honor George's memory by opening a community center in the neighborhood where he'd lived his entire adult life. The building was a former warehouse that had been sitting empty for 4 years. Owner had died. Heirs couldn't agree on what to do with it. Eventually sold it just to stop paying taxes on vacant property. I bought it for $195,000, then spent another $450,000 on renovations. The space was massive, 14,000 feet of potential. We gutted it completely, bringing it up to modern building codes while preserving the original exposed brick and timber beams that gave it character. Created a computer lab with 24 workstations running current software. Built 5 private tutoring rooms where kids could get one-on-one help with homework. Designed a large multi-purpose room that could host everything from job training workshops to community meetings. Added a commercial kitchen and small restaurant space where people could get affordable meals. Nothing fancy, just good food at prices that wouldn't break someone's budget. The restaurant was Claire's idea. She'd pointed out that lots of families in that neighborhood were food insecure, but free meals came with stigma. Charging $1 for a plate of food lets people maintain dignity while still getting help. Smart woman. My wife spent 9 months on the renovation, managing contractors, and doing much of the work myself when I could. The building transformed from an abandoned eyesore into something the neighborhood could be proud of. Named it the George Foundation, after the man who taught me that success meant building ladders for others to climb, not pulling them up behind you. At the grand opening ceremony, over 230 people showed up, local families, business owners, city council members who'd helped fast-track our permits. The computer lab was already booked solid for the next month. 4 local teachers had volunteered to run free tutoring sessions. The restaurant had applications from 6 people wanting to work there, all from the neighborhood. Dad came with Diane. Madison came with her boyfriend and their baby son, Lucas. She'd named him after George's middle name. Claire's family filled the room. Friends from over the years, business associates, people from the neighborhood who'd watched the renovation happen. I stood at the front of the room looking out at faces that actually cared and realized something profound. I'd built this. Not just the building, not just the business, not just the wealth. I'd built a life surrounded by people who chose to be there, who showed up, who gave without expecting anything back. During my speech, I talked about George and what he taught me about resilience, self-respect, and the difference between family you're born into and family you choose. George once told me that the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. I said, it's proving yourself right. He showed me that when people try to make you small, you don't shrink to fit their expectations. You grow until you outgrow them completely. The room was silent, people actually listening. Some people will try to dim your light because it makes their darkness visible. They'll try to convince you that you're nothing, because your something threatens their everything. But when you choose yourself, when you refuse to shrink for someone else's comfort, you don't just save yourself. You show others that they can choose themselves, too. I looked at Dad, who had tears in his eyes, at Madison, who was holding Lucas, and nodding at Claire, who understood better than anyone what it took to build something real from broken pieces. George chose to reach out to an invisible kid. Robert chose divorce over continuing the lie. Madison chose work over manipulation. And I chose to leave a house that was never a home to build something real. That's what this foundation represents. The idea that it's never too late to choose differently. The applause filled the room, but I wasn't quite finished. I want to end with this. I said the real gift Margaret gave me without meaning to was showing me exactly what not to be. By denying me birthday celebrations, she taught me to celebrate myself every day. By telling me I was nothing, she motivated me to become something. By erasing me from family photos, she freed me to paint my own portrait. Dad stood up, something he never would have done years ago. That's my son, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. That's my boy in every way that matters. The party continued late into the night. Madison left early to put Lucas to bed, but not before hugging me. A real hug without agenda or manipulation. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me it was possible to change. You did that yourself, I told her. I just stopped enabling the alternative. Dad stayed until the end, helping clean up like a volunteer rather than expecting to be served. As we stacked chairs together, he said something that stayed with me. I wasted 21 years being afraid of your mother's anger, afraid of making waves, afraid of standing up for what was right. The funny part is once I finally did it, I realized the only thing I should have been afraid of was wasting more time being afraid. Better late than never, I said. Still, he replied, looking at the empty room that would soon be filled with kids learning and growing. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough when it counted, when you needed me to be. We can't change the past, I told him. But you're here now. That counts for something. As Claire and I locked up that night, She took my hand and said something I'll never forget. You know what the best revenge really is? It's not success or money or even happiness. It's indifference. Margaret is out there somewhere, still angry, still bitter, still blaming everyone else. But you've moved so far past her that she's not even a footnote in your story anymore. She's just a catalyst that started a reaction she couldn't control. She was right. I rarely thought about Margaret anymore. When I did, it was with the kind of detached curiosity you might have about a stranger's problems. Her hold over me had dissolved completely, replaced by the solid foundation of real relationships and earned success. Looking back now, getting banned from my own birthday was the greatest gift my toxic family ever gave me. It forced me to stop waiting for them to celebrate my existence and start celebrating it myself. It taught me that you can't earn love from people who see your success as their failure. And most importantly, it showed me that sometimes the best way to honor where you came from is to become everything they tried to prevent you from being. I'm 38 now. Claire and I have 3 kids who are growing up in a house where birthdays are celebrated, achievements are recognized, and love isn't conditional on being better than someone else. Madison brings Lucas over for Sunday dinners where he plays with his cousins and learns that family gatherings can be about joy rather than judgment. Dad is an active grandfather, the kind he never got to be before. He still apologizes sometimes for the lost years, but I tell him the same thing every time. We can't change the past, but we can choose the future. As for Margaret, I heard through distant relatives that she's still at that receptionist job, still telling anyone who will listen about her ungrateful children who abandoned her. The difference between her and Madison is stark. Madison chose growth, whereas Margaret chose victimhood.